So like, I haven't had time to fucking keep rewatching Inuyasha, and I really wanted to before the new series. So, okay, so I found this video and I watched it, and it was pretty fucking good. Cause I plan on watching Yashasime. I don't even remember what the fuck the sequel's gonna be called. It's coming out next weekend, I think. First episode. So like, I plan on watching it on stream, like every time a new episode premieres. So I kind of wanted to like watch this summary of the original series with you guys before we start that, because this pretty much covers all the important points except for like a few things. Like this dude did a really good job with this video.
Inuyasha was the first anime I've ever watched, and as
Same,
such,
fam.
it has a pretty special place in my heart. Which is pretty exciting because it's getting a sequel anime at the end of this year. But for many of us, it has been
just put the stream down for a little bit. Just come back in like 18 minutes.
So I thought it would be helpful to do a quick review of the series and remind everyone of what had happened so far during Inuyasha. I'm going to be going more or less in chronological order, but I am just trying to make this a quick refresher overall. If you do enjoy this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe so I know to make more Inuyasha content in the future. I have a lot of ideas that would be very fun. With all that being said though, I'm going to break this video down into 2 or 3 sections so it's a little bit more clear. So let's start things off with the origins of the Shikon Jewel. To me, Inuyasha's actual plot has much less to do with Inuyasha and more to do with the story of the Shikon Jewel. Obviously, the progression of the story itself follows Inuyasha, and there's a heavy emphasis on his relationship with Kagome, but as far as what's actually important in the story, like there's a lot of fluff outside of the Shikon Jewel itself. As such, we're going back about 1,000 years to the Heian period of Japan. In this age, where shoguns served as leaders of Japan, wars and famine covered
while we
the
have
land.
this video on too,
Demons
I'm gonna go
would
take a
feast
piss
on
and
the corpses of
like
humanity
get ready to play
and
Among
began
Us.
to grow in numbers as they roamed the world. Where there is evil, there is also good though, and amongst the chaos lived an extremely powerful priestess named Midoriko. She was known as the most powerful human of her time and had the unique ability to purify a demon's soul and make them harmless. She was able to do this by manipulating the 4 souls which created all things in the world. There was Aramitama, meaning courage, Nigimitama, meaning friendship, Kushimitama, meaning wisdom, and Sakimitama, meaning love, something pulled directly from Shinto lore. Midoriko wasn't just powerful though, she was also beautiful, and as such a man fell in love with her. His heart became filled with spite and lust and hatred when he realized that he couldn't have her, and he began to attract hundreds of demons, dragons, and ogres to him, which possessed his body, devouring him and transforming him into a horrible demon himself with no shred of humanity. Essentially, just as Midoriko could shift the 4 souls of a demon to purify it, these monsters could shift the 4 souls of this man to corrupt him and use his body as a host to fuse into. This new amalgamation of demons attacked Midoriko, and after battling for 7 days and nights, Midoriko was finally pierced by one of the demon's fangs. This demon was more than Midoriko was able to purify due to the massive number which had fused together, and as a result, Midoriko reached into herself to force out the demon's soul, but in doing so, also pushed out her own. What was released became a prison for both the demon soul and her own, which would forever house a battle between good and evil. This was the creation of the Jewel of 4 Souls, or as it's more commonly known, the Shikon Jewel. When the jewel is whole, it is said that it could grant a wish to its owner. However, if someone simply owned a shard of the jewel, my understanding is that it acted in the same way that the demons or Midoriko did, manipulating the 4 souls within someone to make a human or demon more humane or demonic. In doing so, the jewel simultaneously will have its own balance shifted in the process, whether it be used for good or evil. As Miroku explained, it's an artifact with a great potential for good or evil, but he has never heard of an instance where it was used for good. Obviously, the appeal of a jewel which can grant someone demonic strength, or even amplify the strength of an actual demon, was not lost, and it began being passed from person to demon and back to person over and over again for about 500 years. with the cycle only stopping when it was removed from a demon by Sango's grandfather, a great demon slayer. We'll get more into Sango in about 50 years, but for now, just remember her name. Having been used for evil so many times, the jewel was now tainted and malicious. As a result, the demon slayers felt unprepared to deal with it, and gave it to the priestess Kikyo for safekeeping and purification. And with the introduction of Kikyo, we can finally talk about the situation which directly led to the story of Inuyasha. Taking place in the Sengoku era, so about the 1500s, we have three relevant characters: Inuyasha, Kikyo, and Onigumo. Inuyasha was a half-demon. He was born from a human mother and a great dog demon named Inu no Taisho, who essentially was the biggest badass in Japan. He also had a half-brother who was full demon, named Sashomaru. However, at this point, they rarely interacted. The reason for this is that due to Inuyasha being a half-demon, Sashomaru was disgusted by him. He was tainted in his eyes. And similarly, humanity feared him because he was not all human. He was stuck between two worlds and belonged to neither. Inuyasha never really belonged and wished for a way to become a full demon.
I kind of relate
not
this,
only feel whole,
that kind of character arc that Inuyasha goes through to like shit like Steven Universe. Like he's part of the aliens and the humans, so he brings them together.
However, when
he
he
is the
eventually
key
met with Kikyo, they began to fall in love with each other. And as time moved on, Inuyasha would be swayed away from using the Shikon jewel to become a demon, and begin to look towards becoming a human instead. But just because things were going all sunshine and rainbows for Inuyasha and Kikyo, didn't mean that others weren't still greedy for the jewel. A man named Onigumo hired a thief named Rasetsu to find Kikyo and take the jewel. However, he failed to mention that Inuyasha was essentially acting as her protector. Rasetsu lost an eye but managed to survive, and he was more than a little upset with Onigumo. He found the inn that Onigumo was staying inside of and blew it up, and then threw his charred body off of a cliff. Despite this, Onigumo survived and was found by Kikyo. The priestess nursed him back to the point where he was able to speak, and Onigumo eventually developed feelings for her. However, he was aware that he would never be able to move again, and thus he could never be with her. His last gambit was to make a wish, a deal with the devil, or I guess the devils in this case, in an attempt to get his hands on the sacred jewel. He offered his body to countless demons, just as it had happened 500 years prior. However, Onigumo was different. All of the demons fused together to create one new body, with Onigumo acting as their connector. Rather than being consumed whole, Onigumo himself fused with the demons and became the half-demon Naraku. His first act in his new shape-shifting form was to disguise himself as Inuyasha and Kikyo to cause them to hate each other and corrupt the jewel. He mortally wounded Kikyo while appearing as Inuyasha, and then returned to the village as Kikyo and told the villagers that Inuyasha was coming for the jewel in an attempt to take it. Inuyasha had sensed that something was wrong and returned to the village to protect the jewel. But with Naraku's lies, he had to enter the village by force. The barely alive Kikyo witnessed Inuyasha fleeing with the jewel and used a sacred arrow to bind him to the Tree of Ages. Naraku believed that Kikyo would use the jewel to heal herself. However, she ordered her sister Kaede to cremate it with her body so that she could take it with her into the afterlife. Naraku would spend the next 50 years planning for the jewel's return. In that time, he kind of compartmentalized and imprisoned the consciousness of Onigumo within himself, and in doing so ensured that his human heart would not interfere. As the story progresses, we see Naraku time and time again trying to remove the human or weak parts of himself, and this is just another
reminds me a lot of like the Horcruxes.
He also cursed a monk
he
named
makes like
Miyatsu
other
with
versions
the
of
wind
himself.
tunnel, essentially a black
Horcruxes
hole
in
on
Harry
their
Potter.
hand, which would allow them to devour anything. But this would come at a price, because each time he used it, and over time just passively, the wind tunnel would expand, eventually swallowing its wielder whole. And this would be passed down from each generation of the family until Naraku himself was killed. Okay, so the past's past is dealt with, and luckily the future's past is much simpler. God, did I hate that sentence, but I think it makes sense. Anyways, skip ahead another 50 years, and a girl named Kagome from the modern world falls through the Bone Eater's well and enters this version of feudal Japan.
Okay, so he doesn't explain why, because the series doesn't like exactly explain why, because a lot of people are like, she just magically goes through the well, like why? So I think like the show like heavily implies like reincarnation and like destinies and shit. So like I think because Kagome literally grows up next to the tree like hundreds of years later that Inuyasha was bound to. Like she grows up near that shrine and she's the reincarnation of Kikyo. I think like I don't know, the powers of the universe, like this was the universe's way of getting Kikyo back to finish off Naraku with Inuyasha and like setting things straight. Like so that's what like pulled her through the well basically. And I don't know why that well in particular. It's I guess it's said to have like strong demonic powers. That's why they call it the Bone Eater's Well because there's like so many demons bodies down there. So I guess that's why it interacted with her in that way.
As it turns out, Kagome is Kikyo's reincarnation, and as such, the sacred jewel is just chillin' inside her. She's
Yeah, because
attacked by Mistress
Kikyo literally
Centipede,
had the
and
jewel
demon
burned with
pulls
her
out
when
the
she
sacred
died.
jewel from
So
inside her. Kagome needs to release
kind of the
Inuyasha
explanation
from
for
the
why
sacred
she's
tree
born with
in
it
order
inside
to
of her.
protect her. And while Mistress Centipede would be defeated, the jewel would eventually find its way
Because the
into
jewel
the
just
body of a
disappeared
carrion
after
crow
they
called
burned her body.
Shikon. Kagome tries to shoot the bird down with an arrow, but in doing so, she accidentally hits the jewel and shatters it, sending countless shards flying across the sky. Luckily for me, the show kind of becomes a monster of the week kind of thing. So while there are a ton of episodes, I'm going to be focusing on major characters and plot points from this point on, and that leads us to our second section, Naraku, because fuck you, that's why. Inuyasha and Kagome set out on a mission to gather these sacred jewel shards, and because of the show's genre, obviously there's a bunch of romantic tension there. However, as they start exploring, we start getting into our colorful cast. We meet Shippo, the fox demon, who is quite possibly the most useless character in all of anime.
True.
Basically, this kid is a typical kitsune, with
Not
mild
even a good
control of his
comedic relief.
powers. They can create illusions and play pranks, but most of the
Inuyasha
time
is
they're
funnier.
either just acting overconfident or crying. And rarely there's anything in
Moroku's
between.
funnier.
We also have our perverted monk himself, Miroku. Miroku was a traveling monk who essentially just scammed people by doing fake exorcisms, and at the same time was trying to meet a woman so that he could knock her up. I am not kidding, that was his character. But there's more or less a reason for that. If you remember, I mentioned a monk named Miyatsu who was cursed by Naraku. Well, as it turns out, Miroku is his grandson, and he's looking to have a child so that if he fails to kill Naraku, his child will be able to take his place and carry on the mission of killing the demon and freeing his lineage. And that brings us to our final member of the main cast, Sango, and our first non-flashback experience with Naraku being the worst. Posing as the son of a daimyo, Naraku lured the best demon slayers from their village. He took control of a young boy named Kohaku and forced him to slay his father and all the other demon slayers before eventually being taken out by the palace guards. Meanwhile, while the demon slayers were away, Naraku sent a horde of demons to their village to wipe everyone there out. While burying the bodies of the demon slayers, Naraku found Sango, Kohaku's sister, still alive and sent her after Inuyasha, blaming him for the attack on the village. All pretty messed up, right? Well, it actually gets much worse, as Naraku resurrected Kohaku using a jewel shard and uses him as a puppet to manipulate and kind of mentally torture Sango. And you might be asking why he's doing this. He doesn't actually gain much from it, but it's because Naraku. Fuck you, that's why. While Naraku was basically making new enemies for no reason, an old friend of his was being resurrected. A demon witch steals Kikyo's bones and tries to revive her. But the priestess came back hella pissed on account of being betrayed, tricked, and lied to. She immediately turns on the witch and kills her, and goes on to steal souls from the living so that she can survive long enough to kill Naraku for what he did. Her just being alive creates a weird, time-traveling, furry, necrophiliac love triangle between Inuyasha, herself, and Kagome, so there's that at least. Another recurring but much less interesting and useful character is Koga, basically a wolf demon who shows up and wants to bang Kagome. That's kinda his whole character, honestly. And the last major character that we're going to be talking about is Sesshomaru, Inuyasha's brother. Yes, there's other characters like Kaede, Best Girl Yura, Naraku's incarnations, Jinenji, and that one dude who brings Kagome all those weird natural medicines, and literally hundreds more. But I want to finish this video by the end of this century, so we're only going to be talking about these major core characters. Sesshomaru, as I mentioned earlier, is Inuyasha's full demon brother who hates humans. We first meet him when he attacks Inuyasha while looking for their father's sword, the Tessaiga, which he believes is his rightful inheritance, despite already being left the Tenseiga. However, because Sesshomaru is a full demon, he can't use the sword. Inuyasha wins the fight eventually and cuts off one of his brother's arms in the process. Soon after, Naraku shows up and offers Sesshomaru a human arm with a jewel shard in it so that he can act as a half-demon, and actually manage to use Tetsaiga when he attacks Inuyasha again. However, when the attempt fails, Sesshomaru's anger turns towards Naraku for having tried to manipulate him. Also relevant to Sesshomaru's character is that while he does hate humans, he eventually begins to like a singular human named Rin. Rin is a jelly bean of kindness who tries to tend to Sesshomaru's wounds after his first battle with Inuyasha. Sesshomaru soon after finds that she's been attacked by wolves and has been killed. Using the Tenseiga, Sesshomaru brings her back to life. Yes, Sesshomaru can bring people back to life, and she acts as a vassal to him, second to Jaken. Rin really is the primary factor in Sesshomaru's development in becoming less demonic and more kind-hearted. But that sets up...
Okay, so he says that, but he doesn't go into like a detail that I think is really important towards the end of the show. So Rin is what like gets him to develop to love another person and protect that person instead of just caring about himself, and to accept humans and accept his brother for being half human. And so the reason he's also pissed off because his half demon brother he thinks doesn't deserve it got Tetseiga instead of him, right? So Tetseiga was said to be the Fang because their dad in his full demon form is like fucking huge. So and like the sword is like gigantic. So it was said to be his right Fang, their father's right Fang, like fashioned into a sword. And it has all his demonic powers and shit. And he just gave his son Tenseiga instead of Tetsaiga, and Tenseiga doesn't even have the power to kill, only to bring people back to life, as like a lesson to him. And it turns out towards the end of the series that Tenseiga and Tetsaiga were actually part of the same Fang and were split to teach this lesson to both of them. And only once Sesshomaru learned that lesson and found someone to care over and goddamn near, like he pretty much sacrificed himself, like he was about to die to save Rin, the swords combined back together, and Sesshomaru's arm, Sesshomaru had been lost an arm and he just kept replacing it with other demon arms. It like the fake arm he has like blows up and like reveals Backsaiga, one of his other dad's fangs, with like crazy power. Like it's like basically like Exodia obliterating shit whenever he uses it. And he was only allowed to use that. Like it was only going to be revealed to him once he learned that lesson, once he like learned to care for others and not hate humans. Because, you know, their dad fell in love with a human. Blah, blah, blah. And he wanted both his sons to learn that lesson too. So now Inuyasha has the full power of Tetsaiga. Like he has like a whole new like it's basically like a fucking black hole like backlash or what's the fucking wind scar? It's like a black hole wind scar. Like he could just fucking open up like fucking black holes in the fucking sky with it and like just like take shit apart once the Tenseiga and Tetsaiga come back together. So I thought that was very important too, and he skips over that.
Up all of our main characters. We have Inuyasha and Kikyo, who were wronged by Naraku in the past. Kagome, Inuyasha, and Kikyo forming a weird love triangle, with Kagome being Kikyo's reincarnation. We have Miroku, whose family has been cursed by Naraku, and he's seeking to kill the demon to cure that curse. And also, he has a thing for Sango, whose family was wiped out by Naraku for seemingly no reason, and whose brother was used as a puppet, before eventually joining in with Sesshomaru and Rin. And that leads us to Sesshomaru, who was just kind of manipulated by Naraku and doesn't like that. Cool, has Naraku fucked everyone yet? Yeah? Good. Let's move on to our third and final section, the final act. So as I said, the story becomes more or less a monster of the week sort of thing. They hunt down Naraku, slay some random demons to take their shards, and when they find Naraku, it turns out to be a fake, on loop for about 200 episodes until the final act, where every character essentially comes together to battle
when he gets the whole thing
after
together.
A big training arc or power boost, with the exception of Kikyo, who dies in one of the first stages of this battle.
Naraku so this is the last thing I have to talk about that he kind of glosses over. So Kikyo dies. Once all of them join forces to fight Naraku in the final act, Kikyo's the first person to die, and the way she went was fitting because her younger sister Kaede even said it best. Like, Kagome literally is like the universe telling you, Inuyasha, that it's giving you a second chance to be with Kikyo. Like, Kikyo has long been dead. This is not the real Kikyo. So Kikyo shouldn't even exist. And she starts to realize that herself towards the end. And you remember Sango's brother Kohaku, he was resurrected by Naraku with the jewel shard and kept alive as a puppet. But they could never remove the jewel shard because that would kill him. So they were constantly trying to find a way to, like, they want to get him back, get the jewel shard out, and keep him alive. Kikyo gives her life in this battle to not only take off the spell that Naraku has on him, on Kohaku, but remove the jewel shard, purify it, and give her soul's energy to him to keep him alive without it. So she literally saves Kohaku for her life because she realized, I don't need to be here anyway. You know, I'm already supposed to be dead. And I thought that was a great ending for her character. And a pretty smart way to, like, resolve the Kohaku Sango thing.
Inevitably completes and absorbs the Shikon jewel and begins transforming. He feeds his soul to the jewel itself, and a massive miasma spreads. However, together Inuyasha and Sesshomaru are able to destroy Naraku's body as Kagome pierces the Shikon jewel with a sacred arrow. The wind tunnel on Moroku's hand vanishes, and Kagome is pulled into her own timeline with no memories of the past era and a nagging feeling that something is wrong. When she touches the sacred tree that Inuyasha had been bound to, the jewel gives her a warning that she will always remain there unless she makes a selfish wish to return. Inuyasha dives into the sacred jewel with a dimensional cut from his sword and meets the demon of the sacred jewel. Essentially, if Naraku had been a puppet master this entire time, this demon was the one controlling Naraku. Keep in mind, the jewel had been housing a battle for 1,000 years now, which means that both parties have been intact the entire time. At least, both parties were still alive. The demon which fought Midoriko was still very much alive inside the jewel. He tells Inuyasha that because Naraku's wish for Kikyo's heart was never fulfilled, Midoriko had faded inside the jewel. And if Kagome makes a selfish wish on the jewel, she will take Midoriko's place inside the jewel, where she'll have to fight the demon for eternity. Inuyasha manages to reach Kagome in time, and together they banish the jewel. Inuyasha slashes through the point in the jewel where light shines through, and the balance of the four souls breaks apart the corrupting presence. Some time passes and Kagome decides to say goodbye to the modern world indefinitely as she dives through the well one more time. At the end of the story, Shippo is training to become a powerful fox demon, Sango and Miroku live with their 3 kids, Kohaku is training to become a powerful demon slayer, Rin is living with Kaede while being visited regularly by Sesshomaru, and Kagome and Inuyasha are married. Alright, so that might not be every little detail that happens through the series.
It's just about, he did a really good job.
Things which you might feel are important, like Naraku's incarnations, but at the end of the day, those to me just acted like more Monster of the Week sort of things. Like, yes, they were important, but did they really change the story much? It just essentially came down to Naraku pulling weakness from himself and sending more demons towards Inuyasha, and that's just par for the course. With that being said though, I do plan to do more individual character analysis on Inuyasha in the future, so that is something we can talk about in those. As I said at the beginning though, the story of Inuyasha to me is more the story of the Shikon jewel and the demon inside of it controlling Naraku, and we just see that through Inuyasha's perspective. With all that being said though, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I promise to have you ready for when the new season drops. And until next time, remember...
But yeah. So I can't fucking wait for the new series. As first anime I've ever watched, definitely one of my favorites of all time. Like it's in my top 5 at the very least. Probably some nostalgia going into that opinion, but yeah, no doubt.